in the winter of 1987, demolition crews were called to a condemned Victorian townhouse on the outskirts of Edinburgh. A narrow 4-story structure, scheduled for structural removal after decades of abandonment. Its windows boarded, its interior gutted by moisture and rot. Yet when workers forced entry through the swollen front door, they discovered something that did not belong in a house left to decay: a tall freestanding antique mirror standing upright in the center of what used to be the master bedroom, untouched by dust, its blackened silver backing oxidized around the edges like creeping veins, its wooden frame carved with faded floral patterns, and its glass surface unnaturally clean despite the collapsed ceiling above it. The demolition supervisor later testified that everything else in the room was coated in grime and mold except for the mirror, which looked as though it had been polished the night before. And what unsettled him most was not its condition, but its placement. Because it was not mounted against a wall, it was angled toward the bedroom doorway, as if positioned to observe anyone who entered. Municipal records revealed the house once belonged to a reclusive widow named Margaret Halden, who reportedly died in 1963 under unclear circumstances, though the official cause was listed as cardiac arrest. Neighbors at the time described hearing her speaking to someone inside the house for weeks after her husband's sudden death, and several reported that she covered all reflective surfaces except one, the tall standing mirror in her bedroom. According to archived testimony stored in the city records office, she claimed the mirror did not show the present, it showed what was about to happen. She allegedly warned a neighbor's son not to leave the house one morning in 1959, insisting she had seen blood on the road behind him, and hours later he was killed in a traffic collision on the bypass outside the city. At the time, grief and superstition were blamed for her statement. But over the following years, multiple neighbors reported Margaret becoming increasingly withdrawn, claiming she spent hours standing in front of the mirror, whispering as if responding to someone unseen. After her death, distant relatives cleared the lower floors of the house but reportedly refused to enter the bedroom, leaving it sealed until the property was eventually abandoned. When demolition crews found the mirror in 1987, they attempted to remove it for resale rather than destruction due to its apparent value as a late 19th century Victorian piece, and it was transported to a restoration warehouse in Glasgow, where an antique specialist named Robert Kessler began documenting its condition. Kessler noted immediately that the mirror's silver backing had degraded unevenly, forming dark streaks that resembled elongated human shapes if viewed at certain angles. But more disturbingly, he claimed that reflections inside the glass appeared delayed by a fraction of a second, as though light were hesitating before returning. He initially dismissed this as distortion from age, yet during a routine inspection one evening just before closing, he reported seeing something that forced him to write an entry in his restoration log that investigators would later describe as chillingly precise. The reflection behind me did not match the room. He described standing alone in the warehouse at 6:14 p.m., fluorescent lights humming overhead. When he glanced into the mirror and saw the outline of a second figure standing several feet behind him, slightly to the right, though when he turned, there was no one present. Assuming stress, he repositioned himself, tested angles, even brought another worker into the room to confirm alignment. But when alone again that night, he saw it once more, not clearly, not fully formed, but as a darker density in the reflected background that did not correspond to physical space. Within 3 days, Kessler's behavior reportedly changed, according to colleagues who later gave statements describing him as distracted and pale, frequently checking reflective surfaces and avoiding standing with his back to open rooms. On the 4th night after the mirror's arrival, security cameras captured Kessler re-entering the warehouse alone at 2:58 a.m., despite having clocked out hours earlier. Footage shows him walking directly toward the covered mirror, removing the cloth, and standing exactly 3 feet away. The timestamp reads 2 hours 59 minutes and 42 seconds. 2 hours 59 minutes and 43 seconds. 2 hours 59 minutes and 44 seconds. And at 3 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds, the camera flickers, not a full outage. Just a brief distortion line crossing the screen, and when the image stabilizes at 3 hours, 0 minutes, and 3 seconds, Kessler is closer to the mirror than before, approximately 12 inches away. Investigators later measured the floor markers to confirm the shift. He leans slightly forward. His mouth moves as though speaking. Audio enhancement recovers only 3 words. Who is next? At 3 hours, 0 minutes, and 27 seconds, the reflection in the mirror appears darker than the warehouse lighting would allow, and analysts reviewing the footage years later claim that for 2 frames, less than 1/10 of a second face is visible behind Kessler's reflection, not behind him physically, but inside the mirror itself. At 3:01 a.m., Kessler abruptly steps backward as if startled, knocking over a small wooden stool, then rushes out of frame. He did not disappear that night, but the following morning he submitted a written statement to the warehouse owner claiming the mirror was unsafe for public sale and recommended it be destroyed. The request was denied due to its antique value, and instead, it was transferred to a private collector in London who specialized in Victorian mourning artifacts. That collector, whose name was withheld under estate privacy laws, installed the mirror in a narrow upstairs hallway facing a bedroom door, and according to family accounts, began reporting vivid dreams within 1 week of acquisition. He claimed the mirror no longer reflected only what stood before it. Sometimes, late at night, he would catch a glimpse of someone standing behind him in the reflection, even when the hallway was empty. He began avoiding turning his back to it entirely. 2 weeks later, during a dinner gathering, he reportedly froze mid-conversation while passing the hallway and stared into the mirror for nearly a full minute. Guests later recalled him whispering, "It's not me," before excusing himself. The next morning at exactly 3 a.m. security footage from an interior camera installed for insurance purposes shows the hallway empty until 2 hours 59 minutes and 58 seconds, when the mirror's surface appears to darken subtly, as if a shadow is passing across it. At 3 hours 0 minutes and 1 second, the bedroom door across from it opens slowly. No one is visible exiting. At 3 hours 0 minutes and 9 seconds, the door closes. The collector was never seen again. The room was locked from the inside, windows sealed, no signs of forced exit. Police ruled it a voluntary disappearance, citing financial pressures. Yet investigators reviewing the footage years later, under the Curse Vault Initiative, noted something that was never mentioned in official reports. During the 3-second interval between 2 hours, 59 minutes and 58 seconds and 3 hours 0 minutes and 1 second, the mirror's reflection did not show the hallway as recorded by the camera. Instead, it appeared to show a darker corridor extending beyond the physical wall, as if reflecting a space that did not exist in the house's blueprint. Architectural plans confirmed there was no extended passageway behind that wall, and yet the reflection suggests depth. Since that incident, the mirror has changed hands, at least for documented times. Each transfer accompanied by subtle reports of reflective anomalies, predictive imagery, or sightings of figures not physically present. But the pattern that connects them all is not simple haunting, it is anticipation. Witnesses consistently report seeing something in the mirror before it happens in reality. A shadow before a fall, a bloodstain before an accident, a person standing behind them before a knock at the door. And in 2 cases, reviewed by independent researchers in Manchester, individuals claimed to see their own reflection behaving out of sync, turning slightly later than their physical body, blinking when they did not. These individuals did not disappear. Instead, they suffered fatal incidents within 72 hours of the sighting. Which brings us to the theory forming inside the Curse Vault archives, that this mirror does not consume like the painting from episode 2. It predicts, it reveals, and perhaps most disturbingly, it shows who dies next. And if that is true, then every time someone stands before it at 3 a.m., they are not seeing a ghost, they are seeing a preview. Because mirrors do not create images, they return them. So if something appears behind you in reflection that does not exist in the room, the question is not what it is. The question is when it arrives. And as part 1 closes, investigators reviewing the London footage discovered one final anomaly that was never disclosed publicly. At 2 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds, exactly 1 second before the bedroom door opened, a faint outline appears in the mirror's reflection, standing directly behind the collector, tall, indistinct, head tilted slightly to the side, and when brightness levels are raised, the shape resembles the proportions of a Victorian woman wearing a high-colored dress. The same silhouette described by Margaret Halden decades earlier in Edinburgh, meaning the mirror may not simply show the future. It may be guided by something that already knows it. Warning: if you have a mirror within view right now, cover it, because what you about to hear is the first confirmed case where the mirror did not just distort reality, it showed a death before it happened. In 1994, the Victorian standing mirror resurfaced in a private estate auction outside York, catalogued simply as 19th century morning mirror, provenance uncertain, and purchased by a 32-year-old architect named Daniel Hargrove, who had recently relocated after accepting a restoration contract in the historic district. According to friends, Daniel was not superstitious, not religious, not prone to paranoia, and purchased a mirror primarily for its aesthetic value. And purchased by a 32-year-old architect named Daniel Hargrove, who had recently relocated after accepting a restoration contract in the historic district. According to friends, Daniel was not superstitious, not religious, not prone to paranoia, and purchased the mirror primarily for its aesthetic value, intending to restore its oxidized silver backing and resell it at a profit. Yet within days of installing it in his townhouse hallway, he began documenting subtle irregularities in a personal journal later recovered by his sister. He wrote that reflections seemed fractionally delayed, as if the glass required time to process what it was seeing. And on the third night after installation, at approximately 2:57 a.m., Daniel woke abruptly with the sensation of being watched, stepped into the hallway, and stood before the mirror under dim, ambient light. At 2:59 a.m., he later wrote, the surface appeared slightly darker than usual, and when he leaned forward to examine the oxidation streaks along the edge, he saw something that caused him to step backward immediately. Behind his reflected shoulders, standing at the far end of the hallway in the mirror, was a figure that did not exist in the physical space. It was not fully formed, more like a density in the air, tall and narrow, head angled slightly downward as though observing him. Daniel turned quickly. The hallway behind him was empty. When he faced the mirror again, the shape was gone. He initially dismissed the experience as sleep inertia or shadow distortion. Yet the following night, he intentionally positioned himself before the mirror at 2:58 a.m. to test the anomaly. The shape was gone. He initially dismissed the experience as sleep inertia or shadow distortion. Yet the following night, he intentionally positioned himself before the mirror at 2:58 a.m. to test the anomaly. This time he recorded audio on a handheld device. At 3 a.m. precisely, the recording captures a faint humming sound not audible to him at the time. And in his journal he described seeing his own reflection blink half a second after he had already blinked physically. He wrote it corrected itself, a phrase investigators later highlighted as psychologically significant. On the sixth night, however, the anomaly escalated. Daniel reported that instead of seeing a stranger behind him, he saw something far worse himself, but altered. In the mirror's reflection, his shirt appeared torn at the collar, and there was a dark stain spreading across his chest. He described the stain not as shadow, but as liquid blood. He stared at it in disbelief, touching his own chest instinctively, finding nothing. When he stepped backward, the reflection did not immediately follow. It remained frozen for less than a second longer than it should have. Then it shifted to match him. Daniel wrote in his journal, but altered. In the mirror's reflection, his shirt appeared torn at the collar, and there was a dark stain spreading across his chest. He described the stain not as shadow, but as liquid blood. He stared at it in disbelief, touching his own chest, instinctively finding nothing. When he stepped backward, the reflection did not immediately follow. It remained frozen for less than a second longer than it should have. Then it shifted to match him. Daniel wrote in his journal, "It's showing me something that hasn't happened yet." He did not tell authorities. He did not tell coworkers. He told only his closest friend, who later confirmed Daniel had grown increasingly anxious, but insisted he was not hallucinating. The next day, Daniel canceled 2 client meetings and stayed home, claiming he needed rest. That evening, he avoided the hallway entirely. Yet at 2:55 a.m., neighbors reported hearing a loud crash. Police responded to find Daniel lying at the base of his staircase with severe chest trauma. Initial assumption was accidental fall. However, forensic analysis noted a peculiar detail. The banister had splintered outward, not inward, suggesting impact force inconsistent with a simple misstep. Even more unsettling, the fabric of Daniel's shirt was torn precisely at the collar, and a dark bloodstain spread across his chest in a pattern eerily matching the description recorded in his journal the night before. The journal entry, time-stamped 3:07 a.m., clearly described the tear location and stain shape. Authorities classified the death as accidental, due to lack of evidence suggesting foul play. But when investigators from the curse vault later reviewed both the audio recording and the hallway security footage Daniel had installed weeks prior for renovation documentation, they found something omitted from the official file. At exactly 2 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds a.m., 1 second before the crash sound, the mirror's surface darkened momentarily, and for 2 frames. The reflection inside the glass showed Daniel already lying at the bottom of the staircase while his physical body was still upright at the top, meaning the mirror did not just predict, it displayed the outcome before it occurred. The implication was staggering. The event was not shown as a warning to prevent, it was shown as inevitability, and Daniel had seen it less than 24 hours earlier. Meaning, the mirror did not just predict, it displayed the outcome before it occurred. The implication was staggering. The event was not shown as a warning to prevent, it was shown as inevitability, and Daniel had seen it less than 24 hours earlier. This marked the first verifiable instance where the mirror's reflection corresponded to a fatal incident that had not yet happened. After his death, the mirror was removed by an estate handler and transferred quietly to an antique dealer in Liverpool, who reported nothing unusual for several weeks, yet one employee later admitted under anonymous testimony that she once caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror's surface, with what appeared to be a shadow standing directly behind her, though the showroom floor was empty. She resigned shortly after. The dealer eventually sold the mirror to a collector in Dublin, where the pattern continued: subtle reflections, delayed movements, faint silhouettes at the edge of perception. Where the pattern continued, subtle reflections, delayed movements, faint silhouettes at the edge of perception. But what makes Daniel Hargrove's case pivotal is not just that he died after seeing his altered reflection. It is that he attempted to avoid the outcome. He canceled meetings. He stayed indoors. He consciously distanced himself from the staircase. Yet at 3 a.m., the precise time the mirror consistently activated, the fatal event occurred regardless. This raises the central horror at the core of episode 3. If the mirror shows who dies next, is it warning them? This raises the central horror at the core of episode 3. If the mirror shows who dies next, is it warning them or locking the event into place? Because every documented anomaly clusters around 3 a.m., the same hour associated with the painting in episode 2, the same timestamp where reflections distort and shadows deepen. Experts in chronobiology suggest heightened REM cycles around that hour can intensify hallucinations. But REM cycles do not splinter banisters outward. They do not tear fabric in predictive patterns. They do not display future outcomes inside reflective surfaces. Skeptics argue confirmation bias, that Daniel subconsciously influenced his own accident through fear. Yet fear cannot replicate the mirror showing him already fallen before the physical event occurred, which leads to a darker theory emerging within the Curse Vault archives. The mirror does not show a possible future. It shows the next fixed outcome, and once seen, the timeline compresses. Witnesses who reported seeing altered reflections did not survive long enough to confirm multiple outcomes. In each case, reviewed across York, Liverpool, and Dublin, the time between anomalous reflection and fatal incident never exceeded 72 hours. In 2 cases, it was less than 12. and in every instance the victim reported either seeing themselves injured or seeing a shadow standing directly behind them moments before death. The mirror does not scream. It does not crack. It does not move. It simply returns an image slightly ahead of time. And if that image includes a figure behind you that is not yet physically present, the question becomes whether that figure is cause or consequence. Because in Daniel's final journal entry, written hours before his death, he added one final line investigators could never explain. It's not warning me, it's showing me what's already decided. Part 2 closes with that realization. The mirror may not be a portal, not a predator, not even a curse in the traditional sense. It may be something far colder, a window into a future that cannot be altered. And if you ever stand before it and see something behind you that is not there, do not turn around, because by the time you see it in reflection, it may already be standing in your future. Welcome back to Tales of the Dark. And if you're still here, if you VA watched the previous parts, and Haven T checked the nearest reflective surface in your room yet, you're braver than most, because tonight we continue the investigation into the Victorian standing mirror recovered from the condemned Ashbury House in 1974, the same mirror whose oxidized silver backing distorts reflections by less than a fraction of a second, yet enough for the human brain to register something is wrong. The same mirror linked to 11 documented deaths over 4 decades, each victim reporting the same detail before their final hours. They saw someone standing behind them in the glass. And now we move into the most disturbing phase of this case, because what began as eyewitness testimony evolved into something measurable, something recorded, something that cannot be dismissed as imagination. Because in 1998, the mirror was temporarily housed inside a private archival storage facility owned by a collector who specialized in Victorian artifacts. And unlike previous owners, this collector installed continuous security surveillance in the storage unit, not because of the mirror, but because of theft concerns, and for 6 weeks. Nothing happened. The mirror stood draped in black cloth between crates of porcelain and rusted gas lamps, until on the 43rd night, the motion sensor camera activated at exactly 3 a.m., even though no movement was detected inside the room. And the footage showed the cloth covering the mirror shift slightly, as if disturbed by air pressure, but there were no vents active, no open windows, and the door remained locked. And over the next 7 nights, the same activation occurred. 3 a.m. Motion trigger, cloth movement, until the collector reviewed the footage frame by frame and noticed something impossible. Because while the physical cloth moved only subtly, the reflection beneath the fabric, barely visible through the thin material, appeared darker, as if something behind the camera stood closer to the mirror than the room allowed. And this is where the pattern changes. Because up until now, the mirror only showed victims themselves moments before death. But the surveillance tape suggested something else, something external, something approaching. And on the 8th night, the collector removed the cloth and positioned the mirror facing directly toward the center of the room, leaving it uncovered intentionally, camera aimed straight at it. And what happened at 3 a.m. that night is the reason this mirror was sealed permanently inside the Curse Vault archives. Because at precisely 3 hours, 0 minutes and 12 seconds, the camera flickered once, not a glitch, not a static burst, but a compression distortion localized only around the mirror's surface, and within the reflection, visible for less than 1 second, stood a tall shadowed silhouette directly behind the collector's empty chair. Even though the chair itself sat 6 feet from the mirror, and the room contained no other furniture. And here is the detail. Investigators cannot rationalize the silhouette did not align with the camera's perspective. It aligned with the mirror's perspective, meaning whatever appeared existed only within the reflective plane. And at 3 hours, 0 minutes and 14 seconds, the chair in the physical room shifted backward slightly, though no one sat in it. And at 3 hours, 0 minutes and 16 seconds, the collector, who had been asleep upstairs in his residence above the facility, woke abruptly, later reporting he felt someone breathing directly against the back of his neck. And at 3:02 a.m., emergency services received a call from him, frantic, claiming someone was inside the storage room despite locked doors. But by the time authorities arrived, he was found collapsed at the base of the stairwell. Neck broken from a fall, he had no memory of initiating, and investigators reviewing the footage discovered one final frame before the camera reset. The mirror no longer reflected the empty room. It reflected the collector standing inside it, facing outward, motionless, while his real body lay lifeless elsewhere in the building. And if you think this ends here, you're wrong, because when the mirror was transferred to a secondary containment site for analysis, researchers began experimenting with controlled exposure tests, positioning volunteers at safe distances, instructing them not to turn around no matter what they perceived in the reflection. And across 7 controlled sessions, every participant reported seeing the same progression. First, a slight delay in their reflection's blink rate, then a darkening at the edge of the frame, then a figure forming behind them that did not appear in the room itself. And here is where the mirror's true function begins to reveal itself. Because in 4 of those sessions, the volunteers did not die immediately. They did not collapse. They did not suffer visible injury. But within 72 hours, each of those 4 individuals experienced fatal accidents: a car collision, an unexplained fall from a balcony, a sudden aneurysm, and one case ruled suicide despite no prior history of depression. And in each instance, witnesses reported the victim appearing distracted hours before death, as if listening to something behind them. And this is when researchers cross-referenced timelines and found a horrifying consistency, because the figure seen in the mirror grew closer each night after initial exposure, and death occurred precisely when the figure's hand appeared to make contact with the back of the subject's shoulder in the reflection. And no matter how investigators attempted to alter variables, lighting, distance, angle, covering portions of the mirror, the phenomenon adapted, because the figure adjusted to remain visible within the reflective boundary. And what makes this case uniquely disturbing is that the mirror does not kill immediately. It marks, it selects, it shows you what is coming. And the psychological decay between first sighting and final contact becomes part of the torment, because imagine living for 3 days knowing you saw something that no one else can see, standing behind you. Imagine trying not to look at windows, avoiding screens, covering bathroom mirrors, yet every reflective surface carries the memory of what you witnessed. And that may be the mirror's greatest cruelty, not the death itself, but the anticipation. And by 2003, containment protocols escalated. The mirror was sealed inside a reinforced steel chamber, lined with non-reflective matte coating. No direct viewing permitted, and surveillance shifted to indirect fiber optic observation with filters designed to distort full reflection clarity. But even then, on 2 documented occasions, technicians reviewing blurred footage reported perceiving movement inconsistent with room geometry, as if the figure continued to exist within the glass regardless of exposure. And this raises a question no one inside the investigation wants to answer. What if the mirror does not generate the figure? What if it reveals something already there, something always positioned just outside our visual perception, waiting for acknowledgement? Because mirrors do not create images, they reverse them, they show what is present. And if that is true, then every death linked to this object may not be a curse in the traditional sense, but a countdown triggered the moment you become aware of what stands behind you. And if you're watching this right now, and there's a dark screen somewhere in your room reflecting faint shapes, I want you to resist the urge to turn, because in part 4 we examine the final recorded experiment, the one that was never meant to be public. The test that proved the figure can move closer, even without the mirror present, and once you hear it, you may never look at your reflection the same way again. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare. The mirror arrived on a Tuesday, encased in a crate filled with more warnings than packing peanuts. It was a beautiful thing, an ornate Victorian floor mirror, with a frame of dark carved wood, depicting swirling vines, and strange, almost human-like faces, peeking from the leaves. We called it SCP-093D, though officially it was just the object. The acquisition notes were sparse, detailing a string of unfortunate events connected to its previous owners. Tragedies, disappearances, sudden bouts of violent madness, the usual for our line of work. We set it up in a standard containment cell, monitored by a single camera. For the first week, nothing happened. It just stood there, reflecting the sterile gray walls. The first test involved D412. He was a lifer, and for multiple homicides. We instructed him to stand before the mirror and describe what he saw. He shrugged, complied. For 10 minutes, he just described his own reflection. Then, he squinted. He said his reflection's eyes were wrong, a different color, he thought. He leaned closer. According to the audio logs, he then whispered, "It's not me." He refused to elaborate. We pulled him out. The next day, in his cell, he clawed his own eyes out, screaming about the man in the glass. That was when the real research began. We theorized the effect was visual, maybe some kind of subliminal pattern in the reflection. So, the next D-class subject, D556, was sent in blindfolded. She was told to touch the mirror's surface. She did, tracing the cold glass with her fingertips. Nothing. We kept her there for an hour. No effects. She was returned to her cell, and for 3 days, everything was normal. We were starting to think the blindfold had worked. On the 4th day, she began talking to her reflection in the small steel mirror in her cell's washroom. At first, it was just whispers. Then, arguments. Finally, she shattered it, using a shard too. Well, the cleanup crew had to be given amnestics. The common denominator wasn't the mirror. It was knowledge of the mirror. It was awareness. The simple act of knowing about the object seemed to be the trigger. The curse wasn't in the object itself. It was an info hazard. Once you knew it existed, any reflective surface could become a conduit. Your bathroom mirror, a shop window, a puddle of water, even the screen of the phone you might be watching this on right now. This changed everything. The research team, myself included, were now all exposed. We started seeing things. Fleeting movements in the corner of our eyes. A momentary distortion in our reflection as we shaved or brushed our teeth. A smile that wasn't ours. Dr. Eris, our lead researcher, a man of unshakable skepticism, began covering every reflective surface in his office with paper. He started wearing sunglasses indoors. He claimed his reflection was whispering to him, telling him secrets about the universe, secrets that were chipping away at his sanity. He said the entity showed him the heat death of the cosmos and forced him to experience it for what felt like 1 billion years. He lasted 2 weeks before his resignation. We had to adapt our containment theory. If knowledge was the infection, we had to contain the knowledge. All D-class personnel involved were terminated. All records were classified at the highest level. We, the surviving researchers, were now part of the containment. We couldn't leave. We couldn't talk to anyone new. Our world shrank to the size of this facility. We tried to fight back. We set up an experiment with D781. We showed him a live video feed of the mirror. He wasn't in the room with it, just watching it on a screen. He described the same phenomenon as D412, a subtle change in his reflection on the monitor. After a few minutes, he screamed that his reflection was climbing out of the screen. He thrashed so violently he had a heart attack. The autopsy showed his fingernails were packed with phosphors from the CRT monitor. He had been clawing at the glass, trying to stop it. The entity seemed to be learning. It wasn't just a passive thing anymore. The reflections became more aggressive. Dr. Lena Petrova, our psychologist, reported that her reflection no longer mimicked her. It would sit and stare at her, unblinking, sometimes for hours. One morning, she came into the lab, pale and shaking. She said she'd woken up to find her reflection standing at the foot of her bed. Not in a mirror, just standing there. A shimmering, glass-like silhouette of herself. It didn't do anything. It just watched her until dawn. The next night, it was closer. The historical research team dug deeper. They found mentions of the mirror dating back to the late 1800s. It was crafted by a spiritualist who believed he could trap a human soul in glass. According to his journal, he succeeded. He trapped something, but it wasn't a soul. He called it the echo, a thing that could only exist as a copy. It had no identity of its own, so it fed on the identities of those who saw it, slowly replacing them. His last journal entry was a single, terrifying sentence. "My face is no longer my own." We realized then what we were dealing with. This wasn't a ghost. It was a parasite that fed on perception. The more you thought about it, the stronger its hold on your own reflection became. The more you looked in the mirror, the more of you it consumed, and the more of it filled the empty space. It was a slow, agonizing process of being replaced by a perfect, malevolent copy that knew all your thoughts, all your fears. Our final desperate containment theory was radical. We couldn't destroy the information, so we had to immunize against it. We theorized that if we spread a diluted, less specific version of the information, it might create a sort of herd immunity. A vague urban legend, a creepy story about a haunted mirror. Just enough to create a low-level awareness, but not enough to trigger the full effect. A mimetic vaccine. If people heard a scary story, they'd be spooked, but they wouldn't know about SCP-093-DA. They wouldn't know the specifics. They wouldn't know it's real. The entity would be spread thin, its focus divided among millions, too weak to manifest fully in any one person. That's why this file exists. It's why I'm recording this message. We are locked in this facility, living out our days, watching our own reflections turn into strangers. We are the containment. But for the new protocol to work, the story needs to be told. The information has to be out there, in some form. It's a terrible, necessary gamble. So, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You are now part of the containment protocol. The knowledge is in you. A tiny, dormant seed. Just a scary story. Don't worry about it. It's probably not real. Just, maybe. For your own good. Try not to look in any mirrors for a while, especially after dark. And if you do, and you see something in your reflection that isn't you, something that lingers just a second too long after you've turned away, don't look back. And whatever you do, don't let it know you see it. Thanks for listening. Stay safe. If you have stayed through every layer of this investigation, then you already understand that what we are about to uncover is not rumor, not speculation, but the final archived incident that forced permanent lockdown of the Victorian mirror inside the curse vault. Because despite relocation, cognitive suppression protocols, and termination of all public documentation, one final review session was conducted in 2009 by a 3-member oversight committee tasked with determining whether destruction of the artifact was possible, and their reasoning was simple. If the mirror is the conduit, shatter it, melt it. Reduce it to fragments so small no reflection can form. But what they failed to anticipate was that the mirror's danger does not lie in its glass, but in its completion of a cycle, because earlier case patterns revealed the entity moves from distant silhouette to shoulder contact in the reflection before death occurs, yet no documented footage existed, showing what happens when the figure reaches the front of the frame, when it stands directly where the observer's reflection should be. And so the committee made a catastrophic decision. They reconstructed a high-resolution composite from archived footage of prior victims, layering progression frames together to simulate the final stage, believing that indirect digital assembly would bypass direct exposure, and at 2:57 a.m., they began rendering the sequence on a secured monitor within a non-reflective chamber. And at exactly 3 a.m., the composite completed displaying an image that was never officially logged, but described in fragmented notes recovered later. Because what the screen showed was not a silhouette behind a person, but the person gone entirely, replaced by the figure standing alone in the reflective space, facing outward, not as a shadow but as a depthless absence, shaped like a human outline. And witnesses reported that the screen itself appeared to darken beyond its physical limits, as though absorbing surrounding light rather than emitting it. And witnesses reported that the screen itself appeared to darken beyond its physical limits, as though absorbing surrounding light rather than emitting it. And here is the detail that ended the destruction proposal permanently. As the figure stabilized at the center of the composite image, Each committee member reported feeling simultaneous pressure at the base of the skull, a sensation described later in medical documentation as localized gravitational displacement, and the overhead lights flickered once, not repeatedly, just once, and when illumination returned to full intensity, the monitor displayed only static, yet the reflective glass of the powered-off screen showed 3 silhouettes standing behind the seated committee members, though the room itself contained only the 3 of them, and none of those silhouettes matched their proportions because each appeared taller, elongated shoulders angled incorrectly, and for several seconds, no one moved until one member slowly raised a hand toward the monitor, not to touch it, but to confirm visually what they believed to be a trick of perspective. And in that moment the reflection changed. The silhouettes stepped forward while the physical room remained frozen, and the committee member closest to the display collapsed instantly. Cardiac arrest without pre-existing condition, and the remaining 2 fled the chamber, sealing it behind them, but to confirm visually what they believed to be a trick of perspective. And in that moment the reflection changed. The silhouettes stepped forward while the physical room remained frozen, and the committee member closest to the display collapsed instantly. Cardiac arrest without pre-existing condition, and the remaining 2 fled the chamber, sealing it behind them. But within 72 hours both were deceased under unrelated circumstances. 1 vehicular malfunction, 1 fatal fall, completing the exact 3-day progression observed in prior cases. And that was the moment the Oversight Board issued a directive more chilling than destruction: permanent containment without further experimentation. Because the data now suggested that once the entity reaches the forefront of the reflection, the observer's place is taken. Not metaphorically, but spatially within the reflective plane, meaning the mirror does not merely show who dies next. Because the data now suggested that once the entity reaches the forefront of the reflection, the observer's place is taken, not metaphorically, but spatially within the reflective plane, meaning the mirror does not merely show who dies next. It archives them, and this hypothesis gained horrifying credibility when technicians reactivated a low-resolution containment feed weeks later and observed faintly within the oxidized surface of the draped mirror multiple overlapping silhouettes where only one had ever been recorded at a time, layered shapes, standing motionless in depthless darkness. And the implication is something investigators refuse to articulate publicly, that each victim becomes part of the reflection, part of the background, increasing density with every new awareness event. And if that is true, then the entity is not singular, but cumulative, built from those who looked too long, those who turned around, those who believed distance equaled safety. And if that is true, then the entity is not singular, but cumulative, built from those who looked too long, those who turned around, those who believed distance equaled safety. And this explains why destruction is considered too dangerous, because shattering the glass may not eliminate the reflections. It may release them, dispersing what is contained within a single plane into every reflective surface simultaneously, every window at night, every dark television screen, every faint metallic glint in a kitchen sink, and so the mirror remains intact, triple sealed inside. The curse fault, not because it cannot be broken, but because breaking it could multiply its reach beyond control. And before we close this episode, there is one final documented anomaly that you deserve to hear. Because last year, during routine structural inspection of the vault chamber, an engineer reported no unusual activity, no movement, no distortion. Yet security footage reviewed afterward revealed something subtle, but undeniable. As he exited the containment corridor, the mirrored observation window behind him briefly displayed an additional figure walking in step at his back, and unlike previous cases, this figure did not fade when he left the frame. It remained standing in the empty hallway for several seconds before dissolving into the glass. And the engineer remains alive as of this recording, but his check-in reports indicate recurring sensations of someone standing just out of view. And that is the most terrifying evolution of all, because the timeline may be lengthening the progression, adapting no longer fixed at 72 hours, but stretching, waiting, learning, and if awareness alone is sufficient to begin alignment. Then the question becomes unavoidable. How many of you watching have glanced at a dark screen tonight and felt the urge to confirm? What stands behind you? How many have resisted turning around since this episode began? And how many will test it after this video ends? Because the mirror does not force you to look. It waits for curiosity to open the door. And if even one viewer notices something slightly delayed in their reflection, tomorrow morning something that blinks a fraction too late, then this story will not end inside the curse vault. It will continue in a room much closer to you than you'd like to admit. And remember this carefully. The mirror does not show who dies next. It shows who is being replaced. Subscribe to Tales of the Dark, where every story gives you a nightmare.